work because you want to achieve your vision. And you're able to work with other people secretly. Therefore, you're able to promote each other into positions of power. And because these departments are all siloed off, they're all independent, you're able to control the entire bureaucracy. Because you're able to coordinate, but they're not. Okay, does that make sense? So what we learn is that in history, as societies become much more mature, as they become much more bureaucratic, secret societies have much more power. And today, we are living in a heavily bureaucratic world, and therefore, these secret societies have more and more power. Okay? And does that make sense? The other thing that we need to remember is that there are thousands and thousands of secret societies. Okay, so let's name some of them. The Freemasons, the Jesuits, the Mormons, the Frankists. Okay, lots and lots, okay? We'll go over each one later on this semester. What you need to remember is that at this stage in development, when society is bureaucratic, when they become parasites on the bureaucracy, they are incentivized to work together to achieve their vision. Okay? But once they create the world government, then they will fight each other. But at this point in the development, they will work and actively collaborate together. Okay, so 9/11, JFK, moon landing, they were all working together. Okay? So we'll be studying this more as the semester progresses. All right, so let's conclude. Sorry. Okay, let's conclude. Okay. Sorry, Okay, so let's talk about the atomic bomb. This is Henry Truman. Okay, Henry Truman is the 33rd president of the United States. Number 33, right? He's also a 33rd degree Freemason, which is the highest Freemason, okay? Why is it important? Because he's the one who ordered the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, this is controversial because at this point, America didn't have to nuke Japan. Why? Because America was firebombing Tokyo. You can see the damage, right? In Tokyo, all the houses are wooden. Guess what? If you drop fire bombs on these houses, everything burns. So America was just burning Japan to death. They didn't have to drop the nuclear bombs. Okay? You can see the devastation, okay? This is Tokyo. They burned everything down. There was talk that if America launched a land invasion of Japan, lots of people would have died. But you didn't have to invade Japan because you were just bombing Japan to ashes. So why did they drop the bomb? Well, the other argument is that they dropped the bomb to scare the Soviet Union. But that only encouraged the Soviet Union to get their own bomb, right? So you have to ask yourself, why did they do this? And if you go back to the 33-degree story, okay, which is just explained, it gives you an explanation. I'm not saying it's right, but it offers you a possibility. Okay, so as you can see, all these major cities, including Babylon, including Baghdad, Damascus, Hiroshima, are all part of 33-degree latitude, okay? Guess what, guys? A lot of famous athletes wear number 33. And they are Freemasons, okay? So this is Scottie Pippen and Shaquille O'Neal. We know they are Freemasons. Larry Bird and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar also wear number 33. Okay? 33 is important. Jesus died when he was 33 years old. The word God, Elohim, appears 33 times in Genesis. King David reigned for 33 years. The Vedic pantheon, Hinduism, has 33 deities. Human spine has 33 bones. Okay, so number 33 appears over and over. So these secret societies see number 33 as a magic number. The moon landing, Okay? I'm not saying the moon landing was faked, but there's an argument that it is impossible for humans to leave something called the Van Allen belt. Okay? The Van Allen belt is this electromagnetic field that protects us from cosmic radiation. So that the belts themselves have heavy radiation. So if you go into it, you die. But also if you leave the Van Allen belt, there's nothing to protect you from cosmic radiation, so you could die as well. So some scientists actually believe that it's impossible to leave Earth. Okay? We'll just die. I don't know how they were able to do this. And as you may know, right now, a lot of countries, America, China, are trying to get back to the moon. They're having a really hard time. Okay? They're having a hard time because NASA lost all the technology, lost all the footage, lost all the data. Oops. Oh well. Okay. So how was NASA able to keep this secret? Well, guess what? A lot of their most important people were Freemasons. Okay? This is Buzz Aldrin, one of the 3 astronauts. He was a Freemason. Okay? John Glenn, the first American to orbit the Earth, was a Freemason, 33-degree Mason, okay? As was James Webb, one of the first NASA administrators. James Webb, Kenneth. So these people are embedded throughout the bureaucracy. And because they're able to coordinate, they have complete control of the bureaucracy. Does that make sense? So it doesn't matter who's at the top. What matters is which bureaucrats are able to work together to achieve their vision. This is Werner von Braun, and he was one of the first NASA leaders. And he's a German. He was actually a Nazi who was brought over after World War II to help America build its space program. Okay? And he had a friend or a colleague named Carol Rosen. And we don't know if this is true. Okay? But what Carol Rosen tells us is that when von Braun died, he told us that the American government, was first and foremost concerned about spending money on space weapons. Okay? And to do this, what America will do is continue to manufacture threats to justify all the spending on weaponry. Okay? And then she lists the different threats. First, they will use Russians, okay? The Russians. We have to defeat the Russians in the space race. Then they'll be like, you know what? Terrorists, okay, 9/11. Then, third world countries, the crazies, like North Korea, okay? Iran. And then, an asteroid. We need space weapons to protect the Earth from asteroids. And then the last thing is a fake alien invasion, okay? Aliens. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. So we'll talk about this later towards the end of the semester about a fake alien invasion, okay? That's part of the plan. And they've been seeding this for a long time. So I'll conclude by talking about different possibilities. You don't have to believe me, okay? In fact, there are, I think, 5 different possibilities as to what happened, okay? The footage looks fake. So how to explain this? Well, the first explanation is it's real footage. And we should just believe the government, okay? But we also need to believe that they lost all the footage, lost all the technology, lost all the data. Okay, that's possibility number 1. Just believe what the government tells you. Possibility number 2 is America went to the moon, but the astronauts discovered too many secrets on the moon. Like there are space aliens on the moon. They can't tell us, so they create this fake footage, okay? That's the second possibility. Third possibility is America went to the moon, but because of the lighting, because of the difficulty of filming, they couldn't actually take any footage. So they made it up to please the American people. Okay? The fourth possibility is America went to the moon, but NASA decided to create this fake footage to fool the Soviets, right? Because if it's real footage, the first Soviets might be able to copy the technology, so we should just fake this thing and make fun of the Soviets, okay? Let's fool the Soviets. So the Soviets could not reverse engineer the success. Okay? That's also a possibility. Right? And the last possibility, of course, is America didn't go to the moon. And it's entirely your choice which possibility to believe. Okay? I'm just proposing different possibilities out there. So how can we know the truth? Well, we can use game theory to logically deduce what happened. Okay? So let's use game theory. All right. So we know that NASA's Apollo program cost $26 billion. between 1960 and 1973. That's almost $20 billion today. They spend all this money, they need to produce a result, right? This is almost like 4% of all government spending in America. That's a lot of money. Also, you don't know this, but by 1969, America was falling apart for 3 reasons. First of all, America was fighting this pointless and hopeless war called Vietnam. Tens of thousands of Americans were dying for no reason. Hundreds of thousands of young Americans were protesting in the streets. The American dream seemed to be dying, okay? That's the first problem. Second problem is that the Soviets were destroying the Americans in the space race. The Soviets were the first to send an animal to space, the first to send a man to space, the first to orbit the Earth, the first to walk in space, the first to send a lunar module to the moon. So it seemed as though communism was superior to capitalism. It seemed as though the Soviet system was better than the American system, okay? There's a real fear that the Soviets would get to the moon first, okay? And also the last thing is, remember, in 1963, JFK was killed. JFK was the prince, the king. So that put Americans in a very bad mood. But then later on, other prominent Americans like Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King, they were all killed as well. So 1969, America was divided, was falling apart. People felt hopeless, right? So what this means is that if America sent a mission to the moon and all the astronauts died or they didn't get there, America would have been broken, okay? People would have been depressed. And so according to game theory, America could not afford to take the risk of sending people to the moon. If they died, if it failed, America would have looked like idiots. Okay? But of course, there's always a counter-argument. And the counter-argument is, okay, this makes sense, but why did the Soviets call out the Americans and said, you guys faked this? Right? America and the Soviet Union were in competition with each other. Everyone believed America went to the moon, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that America didn't go to the moon. So why did the Soviets tell the world? Okay? That I can't answer for you. All right? So I just leave you with this thought. Okay? But what I believe is, within the next 2 years, the truth will slowly start to come out. And you will see for yourself what really happened. So this class is not meant to tell you what happened. This class is just meant to give you different possibilities and give you tools to understand or figure out for yourself what might have happened, okay? All right? So any questions before we conclude?
As we said, the secret society might have might fighting with the governments, but why don't they send part of their people into the governments? Why don't they work together?
No, they are the government.
Oh, okay, fine.
Yeah, right. Because secret societies cannot exist outside of bureaucracies, right? They have power because they're able to coordinate within the bureaucracy in a way that other organizations cannot. Right? So only when the bureaucracy has reached a certain maturity, a certain size, can secret societies have true power. Okay? So secret societies are the ones who control the government, basically. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, great guys. So we'll continue this next week, okay? All right. Okay, so today we will finish the Greeks by discussing Aristotle. And a lot of what I will say today will be controversial. Okay, so feel free to challenge me. Feel free to ask for clarification. Feel free to ask any questions, okay? So here's my argument. Aristotle is a paradox. He is one of the mysterious figures in world history. He's one of the most famous, but he's one of the most mysterious. He's a paradox for 3 reasons, okay? The first reason is he is considered to be one of the greatest philosophers in human history. He's next to Plato. He's certainly as influential as Plato. But what is unique about him is we do not have anything originally written by him, okay? We have no text that we believe was personally written by him. And that's unique in human history, okay? We say Shakespeare was a great writer, and we can prove it or show it by reading his text. We believe Aristotle is a great thinker, a great writer, but we have no evidence, no text to show us this is the case. But we believe so, okay? So this is the first paradox of Aristotle. Second paradox of Aristotle is he was a very prolific writer and thinker. In fact, we believe there's about 200 works attributed to Aristotle. What is unique about his work is the range of his thinking and his research. So he's written a book on politics, right? What is the best political system? He's written a book on poetics, theater, basically. What makes for a good tragedy? He's written a book on ethics. What is a good life? What makes a good person? He's written a book on rhetoric. How do you convince the audience that you are correct? He's also written books on physics. He's written books on metaphysics. He's written books on biology, okay? The range is just incredible. We have no analog in human history like him, okay? He's completely unique in the range of his curiosity, okay? Second paradox. The third paradox is most problematic, okay? We know that Aristotle studied under Plato for 20 years. And so we also believe that Aristotle was Plato's most famous student. The paradox is Aristotle's understanding of the universe is radically opposed to Plato's understanding of the universe, okay? And that's, again, is unique in human history. You would think the best student would carry on the master's work, or at least build on it, right? But Aristotle, his understanding of the universe is in conflict with Plato's work. In fact, you could also argue that Aristotle is negating Plato's worldview, okay? So let me explain how. So we know Plato. We know that for Plato, there is a God, and it's called the form of the good. And the form of the good is what is eternal, perfect, and immutable, okay? Now, the form of the good emanates other perfections, okay? What he calls the form of the ideal, okay? So these are concepts like justice and beauty and reason. And then these concepts manifest themselves in forms like horse, right? Or a woman, okay? And these are like the ideal, perfect, immutable, eternal manifestations, okay? So there's only one horse. It's up in heaven. Everything else is a copy of this horse or imitation of this horse, okay? So we live in the shadow realm, okay? The shadow realm, where everything is imitation, okay? This is our reality. It's a shadow reality. And that's why art and poetry and theater are so bad, because they are really an imitation of an imitation, okay? So this is Plato's hierarchy. So from this hierarchy and this worldview, we can make certain extrapolations, okay? The first extrapolation is, for Plato, what is good is if you approach or return to the form of the good. What is evil, what is bad, is if you move away from the form of the good, okay? Right, so poetry is evil, mathematics is good, okay? Now, why is mathematics good? Because mathematics is what allows you to approach the form of the good. All right? So let me give you an example of this. Okay, let's say there's a circle, right? Now, what Plato argues is, no matter how hard you try, you could never, ever draw a circle in this world, okay? Because a circle has an edge. So it's like literally impossible for you to create something without an edge, right? You're like, well, I can draw it on a computer. But if you go at a microscopic level, you will always find an edge, okay? So how do you create a circle? Well, you create a circle by imagining it in your head, okay? So what you're really doing is you're imagining a circle because you're accessing the realm of the forms. You're approaching from the good, okay? So it is only through a process of pure thought, pure philosophy, pure mathematics that you can actually start to understand this world. All right? That's Plato's understanding of the world. Aristotle has a completely different understanding. Okay? So Aristotle starts with this. The God is a prime mover. So the prime mover, just imagine a big bang, right? Something explodes, boom, it moves. And it forces other things to move as well. So what Aristotle is saying is, everything is really in motion. Okay? Everything is change. Because it was all caused by the prime mover. And in Aristotle's world, what is good is if the thing that changes moves towards its purpose, okay? Or the word he uses is called telos. Telos. Okay? If you're moving towards your purpose, you are doing good in this world. If you're moving away from your purpose, you're doing bad in this world, okay? So the example is a soldier. The purpose of a soldier is to fight and win wars. So if you go fight and you do your best, you're doing good. But if you run away from a war, you're doing bad, okay? So this is Aristotle's worldview. And as you can understand, as you can see, these two worldviews cannot harmonize. They are in conflict with each other. You have either one or the other, okay? So let me highlight the three major differences between these two worldviews. Okay? And again, I need to emphasize this. I am not an expert on Aristotle. I'm not an expert on Plato, okay? So I am committing oversimplifications. Scholars who are experts will hear this and be outraged, okay? But for the purpose of this class, I feel these oversimplifications provide clarity, okay? All right? So the first oversimplification is Plato is what we call a rationalist. Aristotle is what we call an empiricist. All right? So these are two big words. But the rationalist is just someone who believes that you can access the truth through pure thought, okay? Mathematics. An empiricist is someone who believes you can only access the truth through observation and what we call induction, okay? Inductive logic. All right? So if I see a woman wearing a dress, and I see another woman wearing a dress, and a third, I'm like, okay, well, from this, I can logically deduce or induce that all women wear dresses, and that's what separates women from men, okay? So for Aristotle, to seek the truth, you have to observe, and you have to induce, okay? So that's the first major difference. Second major difference is Plato is what we call a dualist. And Aristotle is what we call a materialist. A dualist is someone who believes that there's a body and a soul, okay? And if you believe there's a body and a soul, you also believe the soul is more important because the soul is eternal, whereas the body will decay and die. Aristotle, he's a materialist. So for him, the focus is on the body and what happens to the body. Okay, there may be a soul, there may not be a soul. He doesn't really care. For him, it doesn't really matter. What matters is what happens to the body. Okay? The third major difference is Plato believes in the idea of immutability, okay? Or what we call eternity. For Aristotle, almost nothing is immutable. Most things are mutable, okay? The only thing that's really immutable is really God. But everything else is mutable. It will change over time. And so, for Aristotle, the concept is infinity. Okay? Things will always change. Things will always move. There's no stopping movement, okay? But for Plato, things are eternal. There's a grand design, and nothing that changes really matters. It doesn't really affect the grand design. So for him, it's eternity. Okay? So these are the three major differences between Plato and Aristotle. Now, what's really interesting for us is this conflict between Plato and Aristotle is what will inform the philosophical debate for all Western civilization. Okay? So there are two major camps in Western philosophy. There is the rationalist camp, all right? So people like Descartes. And then there are the empiricists, okay? So people like David Hume, all right? And for most of Western history, philosophers will go back and forth between these two extremes, okay? Either the Platonic ideal or the Aristotle reality, okay? Does that make sense? All right? Is this clear? Any questions?
Maybe one question.
Sure, go ahead.
In an earlier class. So for Plato and the form of space,
Yep.
so for him, that's not abstract. Like that's something that's real. It's not an imaginary thought experiment, right? Like to him, that eternity is as real as
Yeah, so that's a great question. And for Plato, okay, our lives, the reality we live in is not real. It's ephemeral. Whereas the form of the good, that's what's concrete. That's what's eternal, okay? So I mean, like, I understand that's counterintuitive to us, but the reason why it's kind of counterintuitive to us is because we're mainly influenced by Aristotle, right? We are materialists, right? Science is materialistic. But back then, and I would say back then in Plato's time, and for most of human history, it was assumed that our world was transitory or transient or ephemeral, okay? And it was a spirit world, okay? That was real, and that was eternal. Okay? Does that make sense? Great. Okay. Again, this is oversimplification, okay? Like if you go to a scholar who understands himself, he'll probably criticize me. Okay? But I'm saying that for the purpose of this class and for our understanding of Western civilization, this will do. Okay? Just understand there's a major conflict between Plato and Aristotle. This will go on for thousands of years. And this will inform the debate in Western civilization. Okay? This is the fundamental debate in Western philosophy. All right? So let's go back to, let's summarize where we are. Aristotle is a paradox, right? We have nothing that he wrote originally. The range of his work is just incredible. It's unique in human history. And then lastly, even though we know Aristotle studied under Plato for like 20 years, at least, Aristotle came up with a very different conceptualization of the universe. In fact, it is in direct conflict with Plato's understanding. Okay? So how is this possible? How can we resolve these paradoxes? Okay, so I'm going to make an argument. And I will slowly make this argument, but it is a controversial argument, okay? My argument is that Aristotle was not a philosopher. He was not a thinker. He was not a writer. What he was ultimately is what I refer to as a censor. Censor. You can also use words like synthesizer, okay? Or editor. Or systemizer, okay? But basically, nothing that he thought was original to him, but he decided what would be political convenient for the moment, okay? That's what we mean by censor. And it's my argument that if we understand Aristotle as a censor, then these three paradoxes go away. We can explain away these paradoxes. All right, so let me make my argument. Okay, my first piece of evidence is we need to compare and contrast the life of Philip II of Macedon and Aristotle. When you do that, okay, when you put their lives side by side, interesting parallels emerge, okay? So let's look at their lives. Very simple. Aristotle, he was born in year 384. Philip II was born in year 383. That's about the same age, right? Now, Philip II, he's a prince of Macedon. His father's the king, right? Aristotle, his father was the court physician to the king. He was the king's personal doctor, right? So from these two pieces of information, what can we guess about Philip and Aristotle? They grew up together, right? Does that make sense? Aristotle's father was the personal doctor of the king. Philip was the son of the king. It would make sense they grew up together. It would make sense they would be educated together. All right? Second thing that's interesting is from 367 to 348, okay? Aristotle went to Athens to study under Plato. Now, around the same time, okay, in the year 369 to 365, Philip went to Thebes to study military innovation under the best generals in Greece. All right? And here I would extrapolate and say they're teenagers. They're going to further their education, right? And learn the best scientific and military innovations in order to bring back to Macedon. And this happens all the time, right? In the 1980s, China sent its best and brightest to America to study science. Okay? So we can also surmise that even while they were away, they were still in contact with each other. All right? Now, in 359, Philip became regent, or basically king. And from then on, he started this massive military campaign to conquer all of Greece. Now, one thing that was interesting about Philip's conquest of Greece was the Athenians didn't really oppose him. Okay? And this is one of the great mysteries historians struggle with. Why is it that Philip II is going around, he's conquering all these places that are in conflict with Athens, and Athens doesn't really resist, all right? And one possible theory is, well, Philip II just bribed all these Athenian aristocrats. In fact, the man who most opposed Philip, this Athenian statesman named Demosthenes, he actually said this in speeches. He said, listen, I'm telling you right now, Philip tried to bribe me. Okay? And I know Philip's bribing all my opponents. But I'm telling you, Athenians, Philip is a menace to democracy. And that's why we must oppose him. All right? So we can surmise that Philip was bribing these Athenians to support him, and that's why there's so little Athenian resistance to Philip. If that's the case, then who's the middleman? Who's the person who's in contact with these Athenian aristocrats? Aristotle, right? Why? Because remember, Aristotle was at the academy for 20 years. The academy in Athens at that time is like Harvard, Oxford today, right? It's where all the rich and powerful go to study. So for 20 years, Aristotle was in contact and became friends with the most powerful individuals in Athens. And that's why when Philip needed to negotiate with the Athenians, it would make the most sense to send Aristotle. Okay, does that make sense? And then we know that Philip united Greece in 338, and in 335, 3 years later, Aristotle started a new school in Athens in competition with the academy called the Lyceum. Okay? So what is the purpose of the Lyceum? Okay? So that's what I will discuss next. But does that make sense? There are direct parallels between the lives of Aristotle and Philip. And we can guess or extrapolate or deduce that Aristotle and Philip were very close throughout their lives and they were helping each other, okay? Does that make sense? Okay, so now the question then is, why was Philip going around conquering all of Greece? Well, Philip had a vision for the world. And it's called something we call the Pan-Hellenic Project. Okay, so Pan-Hellenic Project. Okay, so at this time and throughout most of its history, Greece was divided into city-states all around the world. Okay, mainly in mainland Greece, but also across the Aegean in Asia Minor, Anatolia. Okay, across all these different islands and into North Africa and across the Adriatic, also into Italy as well. Okay, so you have this sprawling Greek world. And there were many who believed that this Greek world should unite together because there's a common ancestry. All right? So it's a dream of many philosophers that a great man of history would arise and unite all of Greece by basically defeating Persia. And Philip II said, hey, that's a great idea, and it should be me. Okay? But the problem is the Pan-Hellenic Project assumes a common Greek identity. And it didn't really exist at that time. In fact, Greeks probably had more common with their local cultures than with each other, right? So if you were a Greek living in Asia Minor, you were probably more Persian than you were Greek. Okay? So in other words, Philip needed someone, a censor basically, to create a Greek identity, right? And the way you do that is by taking all this vast universe of knowledge that the Greeks created, right? And you create an encyclopedia or a series of textbooks that define what it means to be Greek, right? You standardize and you systemize Greek knowledge. Does that make sense? And so that's probably what Aristotle was doing when he started the Lyceum. He had lots of students. Okay? Yeah, so throughout history, all conquerors did this. Okay? Because that was because by standardizing and systemizing knowledge was the best way for you to co-opt the elite and to showcase your legitimacy, okay? Otherwise, the intellectual elite would think of you as a barbarian conqueror. All right? And the best way that you co-opt the intellectual elite is by showcasing a new systematic knowledge. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. So the problem is that in 336, Philip was assassinated, and his son Alexander came to the throne. And as we discussed last class, Alexander had a very different vision from his father. His father wanted to unite the Greek world. Alexander wanted to conquer the entire world to show he was superior to his father. Okay? And unbelievably, incredibly, he was able to do so, conquer most of the world in about 10 years' time. So now, suddenly, you have this sprawling empire all around the world, okay? So let's just sketch out how vast this new empire was. Okay, so you have, Greece and Macedon. Right, okay? So that's the Greek homeland. Thank you. That's the Greek homeland, right? But hey, over here, you have Anatolia. This is Mesopotamia. Over here is Afghanistan. Oh, sorry. It should be Iran. Sorry, Iran, Afghanistan, and you also reach as far as Pakistan. Okay, and down here you have the Levant, and you have Egypt. All right, this was not supposed to happen. Philip and the Pan-Hellenic Project imagine like their conquest would extend up around here, okay? Because you're uniting the Greek world. Alexander went too far, and now you've conquered most of the known world, okay? Then Alexander died, and then the empire was divided into 3 major fragments. Over here, you have something called the Antigonid Empire, okay, the Antigonid dynasty, okay? So that's one piece of the empire. Down here, you have Ptolemy, okay? Ptolemy was one of Alexander's generals, and he took over Egypt. And over here, you have something called the Seleucid Empire, founded, of course, by the general Seleucus, okay? And over here, you have other smaller kingdoms as well. So you have this vast empire. And this is something that was unplanned and unexpected. Now that you've conquered these places, your concern or your problem is, how do we govern? Okay? So you need a new culture. And so these different generals adopted different strategies. So for example, here, the Persian culture is extremely well established, and the Seleucid king and his heirs decided a process of localization, okay? Or another word we can use is synchronization. Syncretization, okay? Meaning 2 different religions or 2 different cultures come together and coalesce together, okay? So throughout the Seleucid Empire, it was really a process of synchronization. The Greeks adapted themselves to local customs and to local culture, okay? At the same time, the Greeks were conquerors. So they still needed to maintain a coherent identity, okay? So it made sense for them to adopt a lot of Aristotle's work. Because remember, Aristotle was creating a pan-Hellenic identity. And so he basically created a lot of textbooks. He basically created an encyclopedia. So it made sense for them to import Aristotle's works. Also, what's important is, remember, Aristotle was Macedonian. And for the longest time, Greeks did not consider Macedonians to be Greek. Okay, this is why it's called the Pan-Hellenic project. That's like the Pan-Greek project. Also, Greeks were very condescending towards Macedonians because they saw Macedonians as barbarians. So it was in the best interest of these new Macedonian conquerors to exaggerate or to highlight the intellectual contributions of Aristotle. Okay? Does that make sense? Right? Ptolemy Egypt was very different. Okay? Egyptian culture has been around for thousands of years. And Egyptians are very proud of their culture. And this is a problem because you're very proud of your local culture. You don't like foreign rulers. And this is something that the Persian Empire struggled with throughout the centuries that it dominated Egypt. Okay? The Persians were famous for their openness and tolerance. Basically, you were allowed to practice your own religion. And they're very supportive of that, okay? The most famous example are the Jews, right? Who the Persians supported in rebuilding the Second Temple. We'll get to the Jews later on. But because the Persians were so supportive of local culture in Egypt, the Egyptians rebelled against Persia many, many times. So Ptolemy and his hearers didn't want to make the same mistake. Okay? They wanted to impose a new culture on the Egyptians in order to show that they were superior and therefore more divine than Egyptians. Okay? So Ptolemy, he did many things that started this process. The first thing that he did was he stole Alexander's body from Babylon, where he died, and brought it back to Egypt. Okay? Because the Egyptians saw Alexander as a god, as the son of a god, right? So to establish legitimacy in Egypt, Ptolemy went on a military expedition and stole the body of Alexander, which started something called the War of the Taiwu, okay? Basically, the successor wars. That's the first thing he did. Second thing that he did was he established a new capital in Alexandria called Alexandria. Okay? So this was mainly a Greek city. It was a new Greek city founded by Alexander. And this is where they housed Alexander's body. And the third thing that he did was he started to sponsor something we call today the museon. Okay? The museon is the root of the English word museum. But the museon was really the world's first research university. So Ptolemy and his hearers brought together the greatest Greek scholars in the world to basically continue the work of Aristotle, to standardize and systemize Greek culture so that they can impose it on the local Egyptian culture. Okay, does that make sense? All right? And the most famous aspect of the museum is the Library of Alexandria. And the Ptolemies spent a lot of money on the Library of Alexandria, mainly by going around and collecting original manuscripts. All right, so a representative went to Athens and said, we at the Library of Alexandria would like the original copies, the original manuscripts for Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, the three great playwrights. And the Athenians were like, we can't do that because they're like gods here, okay? We're not going to give you our original manuscripts. And the Egyptians said, all we're going to do is we're going to take these manuscripts back to the Library of Alexandria, where our scribes will copy them out. Okay? That's all we're going to do. And then we'll give it back to you. And as a guarantee, we're going to give you like 15 talents of silver. Okay? And that's like $1 billion back then. The Athenians have never seen so much money. So Athenians will say, well, okay, well, if it's just to spread Greek culture, we can actually deal with that, okay? So we'll take the deposit, 15 talents, we'll give you the manuscripts. The Egyptians took the manuscripts, placed it in the Library of Alexandria, and said, hey, Athenians, keep the money. Okay? Because the Egyptians, under Ptolemy, were focused on turning the Library of Alexandria into the intellectual capital of the Greek world. All right? And so what happened was that after Alexander died and his generals took over, the Pan-Hellenic project really became what we call the Pan-Hellenistic project. Okay? It went from uniting the Greek world into spreading Greek culture all around the world. And that's why we have Greek culture still with us today. Okay? Because of this process. So let's go back to the original paradox. All right? Why? There are three paradoxes, right? The first paradox is, why do we have nothing original from Aristotle? The answer is because Aristotle didn't write anything original. He stole everything from other thinkers. And he had his students copy it out in manuscript form. Okay? Does that make sense? Second is, why are his works so diverse? Why is the range so great? And the answer is because he was trying to capture the essence of Greek knowledge. Okay? He was trying to unify Greek knowledge into an encyclopedia for dissemination around the world. Okay? And the third thing is, okay, the most interesting thing is, why is Aristotle's philosophy so different from Plato's worldview? Okay, that's a really interesting question. Why are they so different? Okay, so let's switch our perspective and ask ourselves, if you were a king of Macedon, if you're Philip or Alexander, what's your problem with Plato's philosophy? You have a problem. What is it? Any guesses? You're Alexander, you're Philip. You really hate Plato. Why? Why? Well, the problem with Plato is, you go to Plato, you're Alexander, you go to Plato and says, I want to conquer the world, right? Plato would say, what's the point? It's all not real, Alexander. You're just wasting your time. You can conquer the world, but all you're doing is conquering a shadow. What's real is the form of the good, right? Alexander, study mathematics, man. Okay? Do more math. Stop going around and killing people. Do more math. Right? And we know what Alexander would do here, right? Alexander would probably cut off Plato's head. So Alexander and Philip hate this thing, right? This thing is idiotic. I want to conquer the world, but this philosophy is telling me it's pointless. What matters is mathematics. What matters is philosophy. All right? Now, let's now compare this with Aristotle's prime mover theory, right? What Aristotle is saying is everything is motion, and what is good is if you fulfill your purpose. Right? Now, if you're Alexander or Philip, this makes more sense. I'm Philip. My purpose is to unite the Greek world. And the more I unite, the more good I'm doing for this world. Right? Also, if you're a king, you want your citizens, your soldiers, your workers to work hard, right? Well, for Plato, working hard is just useless. You're imitating an imitation, right? When you create art. But here, working hard is what gives you purpose. It's what gives you happiness, okay? So Aristotle also promoted two major concepts. The first is arete. Second is eudaimonia. Okay? Arete is just excellence. Okay? Your Alexander has arete because he's an excellent general. When you have arete and you are achieving your purpose, then you achieve eudaimonia, okay, which is just flourishing or happiness. And that's the purpose of life, to have arete and to achieve eudaimonia. So work hard. Okay? Fight for Alexander. Support him as he conquers the world. Because he's making the world better. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah, kind of a quick question about that. So if I'm a soldier and my purpose is to be a good soldier, am I not like approaching the form of the good, that there's this ideal soldier out there, and the closer I can get to that through my behavior,
Okay, that's a great question. Yeah, thanks, Doug. Okay, all right. So the question then is, if I'm a soldier and I'm working hard and winning battles, am I not approaching from the good? And the answer is, for Plato, it's not. The reason why is, whatever you do in this material world is pointless. Okay? Because this material world, it's not real. So whatever you do is not real. Does that make sense? Okay? So what you need to do is return to the form of the good. But your body can't do that. Your soul can do that. So your use of the body is pointless. You have to use your soul, you have to use your mind. All right? Therefore, you have to be a good person. Therefore, you have to engage in philosophy and mathematics. And that's how you return to the form of the good. Your use of the body, you're just deluding yourself, okay? Right? And if you engage in art, then you are deluding others, and that's more evil. If you're Alexander and you're conquering others and forcing them to believe your fake philosophy, then you're committing the most evil in the world. Does that make sense? All right. All right. So, yeah. All right. So this is my theory of how to best resolve the three paradoxes of Aristotle. Okay, does that make sense? He was basically a censor who was working for Philip and Alexander. And he was trying to develop a pan-Hellenistic identity in order to unite the world they conquered. Okay? So that's my argument. Any questions about this overall argument? Does it make sense to you guys? Okay?
I've got a few questions.
Go ahead. Yeah, thank you. All right, go ahead.
So one of the questions is, how do you know he did it right in his works? Because I think a few things
That's a great question. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, how do we know he didn't write any of his works? Okay. The answer is this. When you write something, you're actually manifesting your thought, right? But your thought comes from your personality. So if you look at any work of genius, it's original and unique. Okay? Does that make sense? In other words, if you read Shakespeare, guess what? There's no other Shakespeare in the world. If you try to imitate Shakespeare, you look like an idiot. Okay? Homer is unique. Plato is unique. There's no point in trying to imitate them. You can't do it because you are not them. Okay? Now, when you look at Aristotle, there's nothing unique about Aristotle. So, when you read Plato, The Republic, there are certain ideas that stand out, like allegory of the cave. Okay? There's certain phrases that capture your imagination. That doesn't exist with Aristotle's text. Okay? They're written like textbooks. So the argument for the longest time was Aristotle did write his own books, but they were lost to us. And his students had to reassemble his thinking from their own memory. Okay? So yeah, that's how we know. But this is generally agreed upon. We have nothing that Aristotle wrote originally. Okay?
So maybe the follow-up question then would be, it's just as possible that his ideas were politically expedient for the empire, and they could have been co-opted by forces outside of Aristotle's personal control.
That's right.
Is that as much of a valid theory as that he's in the project himself? Or?
Yeah. Okay. So thank you, Doug. Okay. Yeah. So there are many different possibilities of how Aristotle can become so influential. Okay. The first possibility is, as I argue, he was actually a partner of Philip's. That they were both trying to promote the Pan-Hellenic project. Okay, that's the first possibility. But another possibility is, as Doug says, he was just a philosopher. He was a student of Plato's. He was very smart, and he was a very good teacher. And after Alexander and his generals conquered the world, they needed like a symbol of Macedonian cultural superiority. And they just decided upon Aristotle because it was most convenient, right? So that's another possibility. Okay?
Yeah, because like one of the, just from the chart there about Aristotle's biography, that stands out to me, and I'm projecting too much onto his dad, but his dad was a physician, right? A doctor, right?
That's right.
And that's like, if that's your approach to the world, you are going to be much more materialistic. Like if you're looking what's wrong with my body, like Plato's not going to be any help for you, right? But
Right.
being much more down to earth and grounded, and that's going to come out from being a physician's son. And I know a lot of the writers that I like from doctors, like Anton Chekhov.
Yep.
And so, kind of coming from the Russian world where there's all these big philosophical novelists, and Chekhov comes into that world with just like down to earth, grounded, common sense. This is how we live.
Yep. Exactly. So yeah. So it is entirely possible that Aristotle was a materialist because that was just his personality, right? The influence from his father, who was a physician. Okay. But that creates another problem, which is if you are so opposed to Plato's understanding of the world, right? Because you're a materialist and he's a dualist. Why were you studying under Plato for 20 years? Does that make sense? So that creates another problem. All right. So another thing I want to point out is, okay, how we have Aristotle's works today. There are three different possibilities. Okay. The first possibility is that Aristotle, in his lifetime, he organized his students and created this encyclopedia. Okay, and it's no different from professors at universities today, right? Professors who are scientists, they actually do very little of the original research. They have the students do it, but they're the ones who supervise the entire process, okay? So it's possible, that's the first possibility. Aristotle was supervising the work of creating a Greek identity. The second possibility is after Aristotle died, his students start to recall his lectures. And that's why so much of his work is fragmentary, okay? We don't have complete manuscripts. And the third possibility, okay, and it's entirely possible, is Aristotle is a fiction created by scholars at the Library of Alexandria, okay? So it's really the scholars at the Library of Alexandria who created Aristotle. And they did so by synthesizing all this work, and then they attributed it to Aristotle in order to create the legend of this philosopher. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, so let's have an argument about Confucius. Let's have a discussion about Confucius, okay? But I want to very quickly talk about the Greek legacy. Because even though we can argue back and forth about Aristotle and his provenance, what is not debatable is the profound influence that Aristotle had on the world. Okay? We can argue if Aristotle was the original writer or the original thinker. Well, what is not debatable is the tremendous influence he had on the entire world, okay? So there are three aspects of the Greek legacy I want to discuss. The first aspect is the Greeks created a new way of being human. All right, so let's look at the major thinkers. You have Homer, you have the playwrights, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, and you have the philosophers like Plato and Aristotle. All right, so the Greeks created a new way of being human. What do I mean by that? Homer was an oral bard, okay? He would get up in front of audiences, and he would, for hours, recite this beautiful poetry about the Trojan War, the Iliad, okay? And in the process, listening to Homer created empathy and imagination, right? Because the point of listening to Homer was to enter Homer's world and become Achilles or Odysseus. And through this process, you became a different person. And therefore, you learn empathy, but you also expanded your imagination. Okay? So that's what Homer did for the Greeks. Then you have Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. And what they did that was different is, rather than sing directly at the audience, they had the characters face each other in a dialogue and a debate. Okay? And by doing this, what happens is you create the capacity for perspective and inner debate, right? Because before you were part of the story, now you have to step back and judge the story, okay? There's a debate going on. You have to switch perspectives in order to understand the characters. And this creates the capacity for an inner monologue, okay? An inner debate in you. And then you have Plato and Aristotle. What Plato did that was unique was he took all the dialogue in the play and he transported it onto the page. But now you're reading it by yourself and you have the benefit of time. Okay? And so this creates a capacity for reason and reflection. Okay? You can sort of reason out if the words make sense to you. You are no longer influenced by the crowd or the emotions of the actor. You can just look at the words themselves and judge them on their own merit. You also have the capacity now to reflect, meaning you can go back to the words over and over the course of your lifetime to constantly reflect on their meaning and logic, okay? You understand? So when you add these three things together, Homer created the capacity for empathy and imagination. The playwright created the capacity for inner debate and perspective. The philosophers create the capacity for reason and reflection. You now have a new human mind, okay? And when you study all of them, this is what we call ultimately a liberal arts education. All right? And guess what? Our greatest thinkers came to us through the liberal arts. All right, so in the future, we'll study people like Kant, Hume, Hegel, okay? Just the greatest thinkers of the past 200 years. What was common about them is they all read the Greeks. And that was just their education. All right, so this is the first legacy of the Greeks, a new way of being and seeing. Okay, does that make sense? Second thing is, now that you have this Greek world, okay, the Greeks need to establish a cohesive cultural identity. And they did that by promoting a Greek education. Okay? But not only that, but they had to bring in local people into this education. So one major function of the Library of Alexandria was to standardize and systemize Greek knowledge. And they did this by standardizing the text. Okay, so there are different texts of Homer. The text of Homer that we have today was developed by the people at the Library of Alexandria, okay? Standardization. They also did something called commentaries. So commentaries are basically like teacher handbooks, okay? They teach you how to teach this stuff. And they created like footnotes and chapters and page numbers, codices, indexes, okay? So the point was to make Greek education available and accessible to anyone. All right? And what this means is we in China now can actually read Homer, Aeschylus, and Plato for ourselves, even though we are not culturally Greek. And that's the benefit of the Pan-Hellenistic project. All right? And the third major benefit is Greek knowledge meant a global revolution in innovation, okay? And what I mean by that is, remember, Greek knowledge is being spread all around the world, and then they're interacting with powerful local cultures. And through the process of synchronization, new forms of knowledge are being created, okay? So the Greeks spread their knowledge to India, and now it's interacting with local Indian philosophy and religion, including new ideas, right? So the most famous synchronization is in the Levant, Greek knowledge was being spread to the Jews, okay? And so when you put the Greeks and the Jews together, you have a new idea that would forever revolutionize human history, and it's called Christianity. Right? So Christianity would not have been possible if it were not for the work of Aristotle.
My daddy has a gold tooth.
So those are three major legacies of the Greeks. And so it is, I think it's perfectly fair to say the Greeks were the most influential and consequential civilization of all time. They're certainly the most creative. No other civilization even comes close to their creativity. Right? Okay, so that's it. Any questions? Okay, so we are finished with the Greeks. Next class, we start a new unit on Roman history. All right, so great. Okay, let's start class. We're continuing the United States-Iran war. As I've said in the previous class, the United States will invade Iran. We don't know when. It might be 2 years from now. It might be 6 years from now. Okay, but eventually it will happen. And in today's class, I want to go over some of the reasons why the United States will invade Iran. And I believe that there'll be three major reasons. Okay. The first major reason is the United States must defend its empire. Second major reason, okay, let's start class. We're continuing the United States-Iran war. As I've said in the previous class, the United States will invade Iran. We don't know when. It might be 2 years from now. It might be 6 years from now. Okay? But eventually it will happen. And in today's class, I want to go over some of the reasons why the United States will invade Iran. And I believe that there'll be 3 major reasons, okay? The first major reason is the United States must defend its empire. Second major reason is that the United States will be pressured by its allies, mainly Saudi Arabia and Israel, into invading Iran. And the third reason is the Israel lobby, okay? So in today's class, I want to explain to you what the Israel lobby is. But first, I need you to understand what Christianity is, okay? So remember that Christianity, it's a religion about a man, Jesus, who we know very little about, okay? We think that he was born in 4 BCE, and then he died in 31 CE, Common Era. We know that he is from a place called Galilee. We know that the Romans crucified him. And that's about it, okay? What his believers say is that he is God come to earth, and he was preaching a gospel or a message that God is returning. The kingdom of heaven is coming. And after he was crucified, he was resurrected, and then he went to heaven. And what's really important is that Jesus will eventually return. Okay? And this is called the second coming. Okay? This is the second coming of Jesus, and when he comes, he will bring heaven onto earth. And we will all live forever in peace. Okay, so that's the story of Jesus. Then the question then is, why this religion become so popular? So popular, in fact, that today about 2 billion people believe in it. Okay, it's the most popular, most powerful religion in the world. And at first, the appeal of Christianity is that it was a revolutionary religion that promised a better world to the world's oppressed. Okay, so if you look at the early people who followed Christianity, it was slaves, peasants, women, okay, people who were marginalized in society. And the idea of Jesus is that a better world is coming where everyone will be equal. Okay, the meek shall inherit the earth. So if you think about it, Christianity is appealing because what it is, it's a free lottery ticket. Okay, does that make sense? It's a lottery ticket. It costs you nothing, and hey, if it's right, then you go to heaven. Okay, so at first, Christianity was an extremely revolutionary religion, and its basic characteristics in the beginning were it was revolutionary, it was egalitarian, and it was anti-authority. And so these individuals who before were outcast in society, okay, like criminals, Jesus promised hope, salvation, and redemption, okay? So before, if you were a criminal, there was really no way for you to redeem yourself in society. And Jesus is the promise of your salvation and redemption, okay? And that's why it was so appealing to a lot of people. It became so popular that it became the official religion of the Roman Empire. Now, there's a problem, okay? Because remember, Christianity is a revolutionary, egalitarian, and anti-authority religion. And now, it's become an empire. So, they had to develop new theories to reinvent Christianity as an establishment religion. Okay? And as we discussed last semester, the person who did this was Augustine. Okay, Augustine. Remember that last semester we read City of God and Confessions. and City of God Confessions, it's really to adopt Christianity as an establishment religion, to reduce its revolutionary nature. Okay? So is this all making sense to you? And one problem that Augustine had was the idea of a second coming, okay? That the world will end. He had a major problem with this idea for many reasons, okay? But the first reason is that, if the world's going to end, why do we have to do anything? Why can't we just drink and party and play video games every day, right? What's the point of working? That's the first problem, right? Second problem is, well, why is Jesus coming back? It's because the world sucks, right? Well, who's in charge of the world? The Catholic Church is in charge of the world. You understand? So Jesus is coming back to destroy the authority of the Catholic Church. That's not good. All right? So for many reasons, Augustine basically said, okay, second coming, don't worry about it. Okay? Jesus will come back whenever he wants to come back. But before he comes back, we, the Catholic Church, will take care of everyone, okay? All right, so why is this important? This is important because from Augustine onwards, we've had divergent understanding of what the second coming means, okay? For people who believe in the second coming, the term we use is premillennialism. Premillennials, okay? Because the second coming promised 1,000 years of peace. Okay, premillennialism is this, okay? Pre means before, right? So when Jesus comes back, he will give us 1,000 years of peace and prosperity. Okay, do you understand? Before he comes back, okay? When he comes back, he will give us 1,000 years of peace and prosperity. And what Augustine said is, no. That 1,000 years is just a metaphor. It's not actually going to happen. In fact, it's already happened because the Catholic Church is giving us this 1,000 years of peace and prosperity. Okay? So he's called a millennialist, which means no, okay? That 1,000 years is just a metaphor. It's not going to really happen, okay? So that's the second big idea. Now, as we know, because all power became concentrated in the Catholic Church, there's a rebellion against the Catholic Church called the Reformation. Okay? The Reformation. And the idea of the Reformation is God did not mean for his authority to be established in the church, to be held by priests. God is meant to speak to all of us through the Bible. Okay, so what the major difference between the Catholic religion and the Protestant religion is Catholics are not allowed to read the Bible. They don't read the Bible. Whereas Protestants must read the Bible. They must seek meaning and guidance from their interpretation of the Bible. Okay? And because of the Reformation, you now have thousands, tens of thousands of different religions spawning up, okay? Does that make sense? All right? So you have different religions and you have different descent. So let's look at England, okay? England. So England is a king, and before the Catholic Church was supposed to have authority over the king. And of course, the king did not like that, so he supported the Reformation, and he changed the Catholic Church into something called the Anglican Church, okay? Or the Church of England, which he would have authority over. But once the Reformation started, again, you are now allowed to read the Bible. And because of that, you have thousands of new religions coming up in England, okay? And they believe different things, but one thing that they all believed in is the Bible is the supreme authority, okay? The Bible is the supreme authority, not the king, right? So this started a major conflict between these groups and the king. And these people are called dissenters. And eventually this led to something called the English Civil War, where the dissenters, the Puritans, killed the king. Okay? But then the king was reestablished. And so this led to decades and decades of fighting in England. So one way that the king tried to resolve this conflict is by sending all these dissenters to America. Okay? To America. And the idea is this. These dissenters believe that the Bible is a supreme authority. The Bible asks us to do certain things, okay? Because it's written in the Bible. For example, you're not allowed to drink. You're not allowed to dance. You're not allowed to have any fun. You must focus on your own spiritual improvement. Okay? You're not allowed to have slaves. And so, because they believe these things, they were constantly in conflict with the establishment, okay? With people in power. And so the king was like, guys, if you really believe in these things, go to America. Why? Because there's nobody in America. So you can build your own kingdom of heaven. You understand? Okay? So this is the origin of the United States. The United States was founded as a Christian nation, which put the Bible as the supreme authority. Okay? Does that make sense? You guys probably don't know this about the United States. You think the United States, it's a non-religious, secular, multicultural nation that believes in science, right? That's what it looks like from the outside. But inside its soul, its history, it is a Christian nation dedicated to achieving the kingdom of God on earth. Okay? And using the Bible as the supreme authority and guide to achieve this kingdom on earth. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. So, these people in America, these dissenters, okay? One question that they always ask themselves is, why isn't Jesus back yet, okay? The second coming. Why isn't the second coming back yet? And different people have different explanations, okay? And so from this group come two more groups, okay? You have some people who are called the post-millennials. Okay? And post-millennials believe that Jesus will come back after we establish 1,000 years of the Christian church in the world. Okay, does that make sense? So we have to prove that we are worthy of God. God's not going to come back and establish this for us. We have to do it ourselves. Okay? So these are people called post, which is say that Jesus will come after the 1,000 years. But then you have another group called dispensationalists. I don't even know how to spell this word, actually. Okay, anyway, dispensationalists, historic, okay? All right, so now the premillennialists are split into two other groups. So the historic premillennialists are people who believe what the early Christians believe, which is that Jesus is going to come back. Don't worry when he's coming back. Just be a good person, and he'll come back eventually, okay? It's not up to us to ask when he's coming back. He's God, okay? He has a plan. He knows what he's doing. Just be patient, guys, okay? That's the historic premillennials. And then you have another group called the dispensationalists premillennials, okay? And what they believe is something different. They believe that, in the Bible, if you read the Bible very, very closely, it tells you how and why Jesus will return. Okay? What the Bible says is that there must be a nation called Israel, okay? And Israel is a nation of Jews. And then Israel has something called the temple, because that's where God resides, okay? It must have the temple. And then what will happen, according to the Bible, is that the Antichrist, okay, or Satan, lives. Okay? Then there will be an Antichrist, okay, Satan, who will be the great deceiver. He'll pretend to be God. He'll pretend to be Messiah, but he's really Satan, okay? And then he will launch a war when all the nations of the world will try to attack Israel. And at this point, Jesus will come back and he will destroy the Antichrist. He will save Israel, and he will usher in 1,000 years of peace. Before, and then 1,000 years later, you'll have the last judgment, where God will judge us to be either worthy or not worthy. If we are worthy, we'll live on forever. If we're not worthy, then we'll burn in hell forever, okay? Okay? So there are different variations of this prophecy with what they believe, okay? So in other words, the historic premillennialists, what they believe about the coming of Jesus is it's a promise, okay? Jesus promises to return. He's God. He will keep his promise. He's probably very busy right now with other things, so don't worry about it, guys, okay? Let's just be patient and trust in Jesus. Okay? That's what they believe. But the dispensationalists, premillennialists, believe that the prophecy, it's a plan. Okay? It's something that we must achieve to bring Jesus back. And if we do what the Bible tells us to do, which is to say, to have Israel as a nation run by the Jews, to have the temple, and then to face the Antichrist, then Jesus will return. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, now, so these are the 4 different views of the end times. Okay, you have the historic premillennialists who believe that Jesus has promised to return. Let's just wait, guys. Don't worry about it. You have the dispensationalists, premillennialists, who believe that we have to work hard to bring Jesus back, okay? And then you have the amillennialists who are like, no, the 1,000 years, it's just a metaphor. It's not going to happen. Don't worry about it, guys, okay? And then you have the post-millennialists who believe that it's up to us to establish a good world. Jesus is not going to do it for us. If we do this, then Jesus will return, okay? And so, but remember, guys, okay, this is a very simple version of the 4 different beliefs. Even within each belief, there are variations, okay? Because again, there are 2 billion people who believe in Christianity, and they all believe something different, okay? Does that make sense? All right, are we clear about the 4 different ideas? Any questions? Okay, so so you don't actually have to remember this, okay? But all I'm trying to show you is that even within Christianity, there's a debate, okay? But there's a concern, an obsession as to when Jesus will return and how he will return. Okay, does that make sense? All right. So, this is important. Now, most Christians don't believe in dispensationalist premillennialism, okay? In fact, most Christians believe that dispensationalist premillennialism is actually pretty evil. Why? Why would it be evil? We cannot believe in dispensationalist premillennialism because it's evil. Why? As a Christian, why would you think this is evil? What's a problem with believing that there's a plan in the Bible? Why would that be anti-Christian? Okay, so this is hard, okay? But the idea is that with this plan, you're trying to manipulate God. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, you're trying to force God to return, and you shouldn't do that. If you believe in God, then you will trust God. And you will try your best to be a good person, which is what the Bible asks you to do. And when God returns, it's none of your business, okay? It's not our concern. So the dispensationalist premillennialists are an extremely controversial minority within Christianity, okay? Most Christians don't actually believe this. And they find that a lot of these beliefs to be evil, and maybe even blasphemous. Okay, you're insulting God with this sort of thinking. Okay, the problem is that of all these groups, the dispensationalist premillennialists, are the most organized, and they're the most fanatical. They really believe that this is true, okay? And we know that throughout history, those who achieve their objectives are people who tend to be the most united and who are the most fanatical in achieving their objective, okay? That's the first point. Second point is that this sort of belief thrives in a time of massive uncertainty and inequality, like the time that we are living in today, okay? Where inequality is growing, where there's more instability and uncertainty. So in other words, there are more and more people who believe in dispensationalist premillennialism. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. All right. So why this is important is that dispensationalist premillennialists, as Christians, have done a lot to cause conflict in the Middle East. Okay? So they're the ones who are actively encouraging conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis. They're the ones who want Israel and Iran to go to war. Why? Why are they actively encouraging conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis? Why are they encouraging a war between Iran and Israel? Why would they want a war between Iran and Israel? Well, no. Well, Israel is already back. Why? Because it's part of the prophecy. Do you understand? It's part of the prophecy. The prophecy is that Israel must first be reconstituted as a nation. Okay, this happened in 1948. And then Israel must go to war with other nations. Okay, does that make sense? So these Christians are actually promoting war between Israel and its neighbors. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. Okay. So now the other thing is that after the Reformation, okay, they developed a new theology called Christian Zionism. Christian Zionism, okay? What is Christian Zionism? Christian Zionism is the belief that as a Christian, you must support Jews in the return to Israel. Okay? So, because remember that Israel as a nation was only founded in 1948. And then basically, in about 70 BCE, the Romans burned down the temple, okay? So for about almost 2,000 years, really, the Jewish people have not lived in, the Jews were not in control of Israel, okay, for about 2,000 years. And there are Christians who believe that it is our responsibility, it is our duty to help Jews take control over Israel, okay? And they believe this for many different reasons. So Christian Zionists, some may believe that that's what the Bible says. God promised Israel to the Jews, okay? So Christian Zionism intersects with dispensationalist premillennialism. Okay, there are Christian Zionists who believe that, okay, for Jesus to return, we need Israel back, and we need Israel to be in conflict with the Middle East, okay? So in other words, the Middle East, okay? Okay, all of them, okay? So Christian Zionism, I mean, you can make the argument that it's a pretty evil idea. Why? Because they're using the Jewish people as a tool, as a mechanism in order to achieve what they believe, which is the return of Jesus. Okay, does that make sense? Because Christianity believes that if Jesus returns, then all Jews, then Judaism as a religion will cease to exist. 2/3 of all Jews will die in the battle, and the rest, a third, will immediately convert to Christianity. Okay? So you can make the argument that Christian Zionism, it's a pretty cynical and a pretty evil idea. Okay? And then from Christian Zionism, we have the idea of Zionism. Okay? And Zionism is the belief among certain Jews that two things, okay? One is that the Jews are the chosen people of God and that Israel is the promised land. And therefore, Jews must return to Israel. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, but what's important is before Christian Zionism came along, Zionism was not, Jews didn't really think this, okay? So it was the Christians who supported this idea of Zionism. And even when this idea came about, which was about 200 years ago, it was an extremely unpopular religion, a very extremely unpopular idea. The reason why is Jews didn't think they were a race of people. They felt they were a religion. Okay? They felt that, okay, I'm in Iraq. Well, guess what? I'm an Iraqi like everyone else. I may have a different belief, but I'm still Iraqi, okay? They didn't put their religion above their nationality or their race. Okay? Do you understand? And Zionism is like, no, being a Jewish person is a race, and therefore you must return to Israel. Okay? The problem with all this is that in Israel, Palestine, it was mainly Arab people. Okay? So there were very few Jewish people. And in fact, Zionism couldn't convince anyone to come to Palestine, okay? But then, of course, the Holocaust happened. And after the Holocaust, many Jews started to go to Israel. And in 1948, they established the state of Israel, okay? And the Christian Zionists and the dispensationalist premillennialists were very happy with the establishment of Israel because they feel that we've achieved the first step in this plan to bring Jesus back, okay? Okay, does that make sense? Okay? So, to summarize, the main message is this, okay? Here's what you need to know. First is that there are many Christians who believe that Israel and the Jews must be used as a tool to bring Jesus back, okay? That's the first thing. Second thing is that America was founded as a Christian nation. Therefore, its soul is Christian. Its first leaders were Christians who believed in Christian Zionism. Their descendants now control the military and the foreign policy apparatus of America. Okay, that's the second thing, okay? And the third thing is that Israel as a nation thinks that it can use Christian Zionism in order to advance its geopolitical interests, which is to basically gain control over the Middle East. Okay, do you understand? And that's what's driving the conflict between Israel and Iran. Does that make sense? Okay? What's driving the conflict between Israel and Iran is America believes it has a religious responsibility to protect Israel against Iran. In fact, if there's a war between Iran and Israel, that's a good thing because it's going to drive this prophecy and the return of Jesus, okay? And then people in Israel are like, you know what? If we go to war with Iran, America is going to fight for us. So why not? Right? We don't have to fight this war. America's going to do it for us. So why not fight this war? We lose nothing. We gain everything from this war. Okay? So the idea is that all this is driven by a religious worldview, understanding the world. Okay? And over time, this worldview will only become more popular in America. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. Okay, good. Any questions about this? Anything that's not clear about what I just what I just explained? Do you mean to clarify anything?
Why Jewish they don't believe they put their nationality first instead of
Okay. I don't really understand the question. Can you repeat the question?
I mean, you said, the Jewish, they don't put, their race or their religion above their nationality. So why, but I think the Christians really believe in religion more.
Right. So, okay. So both Judaism and Christianity are religions. Okay? There's no race. There's no race to the idea of Christianity, right? You can be Chinese and Christian. You can be American and Christian. It doesn't matter. Right? And that's what the Jewish people say as well. I can be Chinese and Jewish. I can be American and Jewish. Because being Jewish is a religion. But the idea of Zionism is that being Jewish person is a race. In fact, you are directly descended from the Hebrews in the Bible, which is complete nonsense. This is not true, okay?
Is this idea still not
popular? Zionism is the main political belief of Israel, right? Why does Israel exist? Because Israel is the promised land that God gave to his chosen people. Okay, and this was a promise that dates back at least 3,000 years to the time of Abraham. And it's written in the Bible. Therefore, it must be true. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. Any other questions? Okay, that's a great question, okay? All right. So I'm making the argument that Christian Zionism and dispensationalist premillennialism will over time become more popular religions in America. Okay, and the question, and Charles asked like, well, why? Okay, let's go back to the founding of Christianity. Why did Christianity become so popular? It became popular because it was in the Roman Empire, okay? At that time, there's something called the Pax Romana, which meant the Roman peace. Okay, which meant that the Romans controlled everything, therefore there were no wars, therefore people were at peace, right? And you think that's a good thing, right? The problem is that if there's peace, then you have massive inequality. Okay? Because war is a mechanism back then of social mobility, right? War killed people. And if war kills people, that creates opportunities for the people who are alive. But if there's no war, then what happens is, if I'm a rich person, guess what, guys? I become more rich. If you're poor, what happens? You become more poor. Okay? So as a poor person, what do you think? You think that life is hopeless. Life is pointless. There's no future. There's no hope, right? And so Jesus comes along and says, listen, if you believe in me, then I will bring the kingdom of heaven onto earth, and I will destroy inequality. Everyone will be the same, okay? So again, back then it was a free lottery ticket. Today, we live in something called the Pax Americana. And the Pax Americana, same thing where for the past 70 years, there's been peace around the world, right? Very few people have died. But all that means really is that inequality has increased. Fewer and fewer people have money, okay? Guys, billionaires make no sense. Do you understand? Why should a few people have all the money? That makes no sense. Because money is meant as a mechanism of exchange and transaction, right? You use money, you should spend your money. If it's all in the bank, what's the point of that? Okay? So having billionaires is a bad thing. And if you go to America, you'll find that there are many young people who feel that like life is pointless. Okay? So they're looking for alternatives. You understand? And this idea of dispensationalist premillennialism, which is like what's happening right now in Israel will lead to a better world, that's kind of attractive to you. You understand? Right?
Why does it feel like this?
Well, because you're poor and you're stuck being poor. Guys, imagine you are a delivery person in China, in Beijing, okay? You're like a Huaidi Yuan, right? What hope do you have for the future? Your life is pointless and hopeless. No one's gonna marry you. Even if someone marries you, you can't have children because you can't afford to have your children go to school. You can't buy a house. You can't afford anything. You're stuck being a delivery person for the rest of your life. Do you understand? Do you know how many delivery person people there are in China? Millions and millions. Okay, so you have millions and millions of young men who have no hope in the future. Right? Yes, because Jesus is coming and he's going to destroy the world we live in. That's exactly right. Christianity is a free lottery ticket. It costs you nothing. And if you win big. Okay?
Hey, that sounds kind of tempting.
Right? What does it cost you? It costs you nothing, right? Okay? Do you understand? That's why it will become more popular over time. Excuse me?
If you become more and more money in this,
Right. So what you do is you support America, you support Israel, you support the war against Iraq. You want more conflict in the Middle East because the conflict in the Middle East will drive the prophecy, right? Do you understand? That's what you want. You want more war. What good does peace do you? Right? Peace just means like tomorrow you'll still be poor and hopeless. Right? But war, it's an opportunity for a new world. Exactly, right? So all this inequality is making people much more extreme and desperate, right? Which will lead more people to believe in dispensationalist premillennialism. Okay? The government, of course, does not want any instability, but what can the government do about it? You're absolutely right, okay? So the government could provide social welfare to poor people, but where would the money come from? Right. You understand? Okay. Who's more dangerous to you? A few rich people or millions of poor people? No. No. A few rich people are much more dangerous than millions of poor people. Do you understand? That's right. United, right? Poor people don't know how to unite. That's right. Yeah, but right. Okay. Okay. So does this make sense? Okay. All right. So this is the I mean, it's hard because this is religion, okay? And we're not religious. I'm not religious. You're not religious. So we don't really understand how religious people think, okay? But remember that on this planet Earth, most people are religious. And they take their religion very, very seriously, okay? You understand? They're willing to die for the religion. Because they think that if I die for my religion, I'll go to heaven. Excuse me? Okay. All right. So that's exactly right. Do you understand? Okay. All right. Because you're not giving people any hope, and religion gives people hope.
Isn't those poor people doing this to support the war between America, Israel, and Iran as a way for the rich people to use it to make them more reasonable in the attack, and they can draw lines. So it's like those rich people are using those poor people's beliefs to support their war.
Listen, in the real world, the poor will always lose, the rich will always win.
फजर की नमाज की खुसूसियत फजीलत अल्लाह के नबी ने खास तौर पर बयान फरमाई अल्लाह करके आपने फरमाया